over the heathens.
By the end of the 18th century, however, the thought pattern of many Europeans had begun to change.
With the spread of humanist thought and the increasing study of moral philosophy came a greater appreciation for the rights of all men. Less emphasis was placed on justifying slavery, and a greater effort was given to ensure the fair treatment of enslaved people. Eventually, this led to the development of an abolitionist movement that condemned slavery and the slave trade altogether. In 1748, French philosopher Montesquieu wrote De l'Esprit des Lois, one of the first major works that provided an intellectual attack against slavery. He directly disputes the argument made by many slavery supporters about the benefits of slavery.
The state of slavery is in its own nature bad. It is neither useful to the master nor to the slave. Not to the slave, because he can do nothing through a motive of virtue, nor to the master, because by having an unlimited authority over his slaves, he insensibly accustoms himself to the want of all moral virtues.
Among others, popular philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire began to argue against slavery in the late 18th century. In his 1755 work, Moral Philosophy, the philosopher and scholar Francis Hutcheson also expressed this humanistic view on slavery.
In all governments, even the most absolute, the natural end of the trust is acknowledged on all sides to be the prosperity and safety of the whole body. The subjects must have a right of resistance, as the trust is broken beside the manifest plea of necessity. All men have strong desires of liberty and property, have notions of right, and strong natural impulses to marriage, families, and offspring, and earnest desires of their safety. Permanent power assumed by force over the fortunes of others must generally tend to the misery of the whole. We must therefore conclude that no endowments, natural or acquired, can give a perfect right to assume power over others without their consent.
Although some intellectuals had begun to speak out against slavery, it was not until abolitionist groups became more active in recruitment and in political reform that true change could occur. There were idealists all across Europe, but there was one place in particular where the anti-slavery movement was especially vocal. As France's economic interests in colonial slavery were increasing, the anti-slavery movement that was gaining momentum in Britain began to influence French policy. The growth of evangelical Protestant religious groups in England, like the Methodists and Quakers, was one of the determining factors in the development of an organized abolitionist movement. The Quakers also became active in the abolitionist movement early on, growing increasingly more extreme in their supports of anti-slavery ideas. In 1676, William Edmondson proposed that all Quakers reject the immoral practice of slavery. During the late 1600s, several Quakers in English colonies were convicted and fined for allowing blacks to worship in their congregations. In 1783, the group submitted a petition to Parliament asking for an end to the slave trade. Representatives from the Quaker community as well as other abolitionists developed a society for effecting the abolition of the slave trade in April 1787. Many other groups also formed politically active anti-slavery societies in England. Between 1787 and 1792, thousands of petitions were presented to the British Parliament in support of abolition of the slave trade. These groups would not have been nearly as effective or influential had it not been for a revolutionary decision made in the English courts. In 1772, a landmark case in English law set a precedent that would challenge slavery in England and would go on to influence abolitionist movements throughout Europe and its colonies.